this live, this doing this cover to cover Bible study with Boldly and Uniquely You. And I'm so grateful to have all of you here and joining me and doing this Bible study together. And we're just going to go through it and see what we get from it. Now, for me personally, you might be wondering, like, why am I doing this? Where is this coming from? Why do I feel like I even can? You know, what makes me feel qualified to do it, I guess, you know? Well, first of all, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called, right? So really what qualifies me in this more than anything is just my willingness. I'm just a willing vessel. I want to be a conduit. And what I love about that idea of being a conduit is if you think about and electronic devices, when you are going to go get those, the best connections are gold, the golden connection, to have that conduit that is like a streaming flow. And then here we are, day one of 2024, our 24 karat gold year. And I'm just a willing vessel, that gold conduit that I just want to, I'm sitting here, just God use me, just use me however you can. And it's not so much that I'm sitting here to teach you guys. It is, I'm leading it, yeah, sure, but we're learning together. The Holy Spirit is the one that is here. The Messiah, he is our only teacher. He is our teacher. He is the one that is teaching us. He is the one that is guiding us, directing us. And what I plan on doing as it goes right now is in my morning daily reading time, when I'm reading through our Bible plan, I am constantly praying and asking God what he has for us, what he wants me to pull out of this, what points do I bring out. Some of the things that I come up with, I know that they're just my curiosity, where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is mind-blowing to me. What do you guys think? Like, I really want to get your feedback. I really want to know where your heart is with these things. What do you guys think? And let's discuss it together. Now, you should know I do not get into religious or political debates. I do not do that. I will not debate the Bible with you. I will learn it with you. I will study with you. If you have a question, we will dive in and we will look at it together. But I do not debate. And I do reserve the right to block and delete anyone that I feel is interfering with just what's happening here. So as we go this year, I just want to show you this, what I've done. This is basically my Bible reading plan Bible. I have separated it into the sections of all of the months, and inside here I've got an index card with the theme of the month. Like this month is Epiphany and Enlightenment, so it's about new beginnings and aha moments and new revelations from God, and you know, just all this newness this month. And then on the other side of it, I've got the check off card that I can keep with me at all times, knowing right where we are in this Bible reading plan. So what I've done today is I've gone through and I've read chapters 1, 2, and 3, and like I said, I've pulled out the little bits of information that really just called out to me, that I felt like in some ways, some of it is where I could tell where I felt like the Holy Spirit was like teaching me while we were doing this, and it wasn't just my own curiosity, which it's fun too, you know. Like, I love that now for me, reading the Bible is like this incredible treasure hunt. And you know, that brings me back to talking about like my passion for the Bible and everything. I wanted to share just a small little bit of my testimony and that. And I think tomorrow for Testimony Tuesday, I'll share it in a little bit more depth. But I just wanted to say, because I was reminded while I was sitting there reading that first chapter today and that excitement of that first chapter, I remember when I was 6, 7 years old with my grandpa, and I had this big, huge Bible, and I remember sitting up there at the table, and I'd crawl up to the table and open this big, huge Bible up, and I was so determined, I wanted to read the Bible cover to cover in one sitting. I was like, I can do it. I can sit here and read it from cover to cover in one sitting. And so every time I'd have to stop, I'd go back, and when I'd sit again, I kept trying over and over to just do it in one sitting. Nobody ever told me it was like humanly impossible in one sitting to sit and read the Bible, but my 6, 7-year-old little self sure as heck tried to do it. So I got very familiar with the beginning of the Bible because I read it so many times. I just kept reading it again and again, and I think the farthest I ever really got was like chapter 10 or 11 in one sitting. And so it was funny that I just kept trying to do that. And this morning, as I'm freshly reading this new, the beginning of it again, it just always kind of brings me back to that little self of me that's just like, I'm gonna read it all the way through. And then, it actually took me all the way until 2019 to fully read it from cover to cover. And it absolutely changed my life and transformed everything about my walk with God. Reading it cover to cover, it transformed everything. To have that daily discipline of reading it all the way through. And on days, and let me give you this little tip for going throughout the year, on days that you can't make it through, that you don't have the time to sit, we have so much time that we can use in our day to get that reading in, to get it into our soul, to just get it into our subconscious mind and let it really penetrate and be a part of us, even if we don't have the time to sit there and actually open up the Bible. You know what you can do? What I love to do is you can actually listen to it while you're driving around. Go for a walk, put it in your headphones. You like to listen to people on YouTube, you're listening to me right now, right? Anyone who's watching this back on the replay. So what I started feeling like when I was doing that is that I would pretend that, like, if I was reading the book, something that Paul wrote, I pretend I was like in my car on speakerphone with Paul, and I'm just like sitting there attentively listening to my friend tell me a story. And it just, everything came alive to me. Everything became more real. And the idea of like, oh my gosh, these were real people. These were their stories. Where I was like, okay, there is such a difference in reading the Bible when you're reading because you don't believe and you're trying to find truth, and then you're reading because you do believe. Because you actually do believe what you're reading, and you understand that the stories are real, the people are real, that everything in it is real. And it's real, and it's alive and breathing, and it changes. That's what makes it alive, is that you can read one verse and then 2 weeks later read the same verse and get a whole nother meaning. A year later read a verse. It's like the same thing. It grows, your understanding grows, and that's what makes it feel like it's breathing and alive. And man, reading it through cover to cover, and then on those days where like I just go for a walk, and sometimes I feel like I just like, that's just a fun morning routine, to just go for a walk listening to the Word of God. And I love that, it was a year or two ago, I was at a church and they kept saying, hearing the voice of God, it comes by the hearing. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to keep hearing. I'm going to keep listening. And I trained my ears, because I was like, if I'm listening to all these YouTube people all the time, if I'm listening to all these other pastors and I'm doing all these different things, why can't I just sit and listen to the Bible? So that's what I did. And that's what I do still. And so when you don't have time to finish that daily reading, then I encourage you to just listen to it. Download the Bible app, look at it on YouTube, and play a streaming version of it. Just listen to it, get it into your soul, and ask God to speak to you, because you still can. Whether you're reading it with your eyes or you're listening to it, whatever is happening, you're still getting it into you. You're still there so that He can teach you and show you things. So it's not so much about feeling so overwhelmed that, oh my gosh, every day I have to, do this. So you can listen to it. Just listen, put it on when you go for a walk or you're going out driving, and it's great. There's so much that we can get from the Bible. And so I'm going to go ahead and dive in now to all of the amazing things that I felt like God showed me today. But first, I'm going to take a quick sip of my coffee, because it is coffee time with Jesus, right? Oh, and oh my gosh, I just love the Christ offers forgiveness for everyone, everywhere. Isn't that great? So every time, anytime is always coffee time with Jesus. And that is some good hot coffee there. So I'm just going to run through real quick here with some things. So first of all, in Genesis chapter 1, we just an overview of these 3 chapters. So Genesis chapter 1 is about creation. Chapter 2 takes a deeper look into that story of creation. It kind of almost repeats, but it like really hones in on what would we say, it kind of really just hones in on day 6, really is what it does. Is chapter 2 was kind of an expansion of day 6. Chapter 3, all about the fall. So as we go through and we look at these days, so in chapter 1, day 1, light and dark was created. It was the light and dark and was separated. Day 2, the firmament and heavens. Day 3, it was all of the herbs, the grass, the trees, things like that. Day 4, stars, moon, and sun. Day 5 were all the sea creatures. Day 6 is where we were created. Day 6 is where all of the living creatures on the land were created, the cattle of the earth. Adam was created, Eve was created from Adam. And then chapter 2 goes into more depth with that. One thing I wanted to highlight here that I felt led to highlight is on day 6. Day 6, it says that we were made in the image of God and that we were given dominion over these other creatures. So I looked up the word dominion and it says sovereignty or control. So like, okay, so we have control. But what really does sovereignty in this mean? So I looked at that too, sovereignty. So I looked up the word sovereignty. And the actual definition of sovereignty says supreme power or authority. So I just wanted to highlight that for people who are, see, I know I have my moments where, yeah, I'll get afraid of an animal too. But at the same time, I try to have like this boldness inside me where I'm like, actually, I was given dominion over this animal. I have authority over this animal. This animal needs to listen to me because I was granted that authority. And when I believe in that and I'm faced with like an animal while I'm out on a walk, I'm sitting there looking at him and, you know, you dog, you give him your hand. But when I'm doing that, I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, yep, we were given dominion. I have dominion over this animal. This animal does not have control over me. So we have that supreme power and authority with animals. I just thought that was an interesting thing to, you know, really point at and look at. And then, let's see, what did I write there? Oh, okay, so I thought this was interesting that in verse 29 of chapter 1, it says, that all of these things were created, the herbs, the trees, and all of those things were created for meat. What is that? What? Really? For meat? It was created for meat? So, I'm wondering, does that mean that we were originally vegetarians? I'm thinking, or something? I thought that was interesting. What do you guys think about that? That it was given, and even in verse 30, it says that it was given to the animals for meat. For meat. Vegetables were actually considered meat originally, from what this is saying. So now, chapter 2. One thing I wanted to mention in verse 10, they talk about this river that comes from Eden and it flows out into 4 different directions. There was a book that I was reading about the seers and understanding a seer and prophet, anointing, and the prophetic flow. And how that book described it was this verse about in Eden with the river, how like the it's like the main river is God, and through God these different types of prophetic streams flow. A Nabi prophet is someone who gets a word from God and they're just like, they don't know why, they can just keep writing, boom, 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 just like God, all the words just keep coming to them and it just flows through. And then you have the seer prophets, where the seers actually can see into the realm, they can sense things. There's feeler prophets. So, you know, there's these different types of prophetic streams. So they come from this one stream, which is God, and then they break off into the prophetic different types of streams. So it's, I just wanted to highlight that on there because I thought that was really interesting to come across that, where I was like, oh yeah, the streams and the prophetic flow. And so it's like that. And then the very next verse mentions gold. And I just loved that because, again, here we are in that 2024 karat gold year talking about gold being a conduit, and it's actually the very first chemical element mentioned in the Bible, gold. It's funny when you don't really, like, when you're, certain things are highlighted differently. This is one of the things I was talking about, where it's just like, it's different. You can read the same things and then just different things come out, where like this time it was highlighted and came out to me that it was like, oh hey, actually gold was the first chemical element, and then the first stone is onyx, mentioned in the very next verse. So okay, now so moving on from there, I wanted to highlight verse 21 and 22. Now, what God has shown me and taught me this last year about this verse is that what's really just absolutely amazing about this is that Eve, there's a couple of things about Eve. So she was the only thing, the woman was the only thing that was created different than any other creature. Everything else was created from the ground. Eve was created from Adam. from his bone. She was flesh of his flesh. She's the only living creature that was created different than anything else. So that alone is extremely fascinating and fun. But then we go a little bit deeper and we look at, as for me, from a woman's perspective, as a woman, the man is the covering, right? And then God is the covering of the man. And so for me, the man as the covering, that means he's the protector, and that he is like the shield and protector for you. But what God showed me was that of all the bones that he could use to create Eve with, he used the rib. He could have used any bone, he could have used anything, but he used the rib, the most protective bone in the body. So it's not only that man being the covering of a woman is the protector, but the woman is also to be a protector for the man. She was designed and created to be his helpmate, and she came from his rib to protect him, to protect the most vital organs of a body is the rib. And so I love that idea, that just, really grasping that concept that women aren't just helpless little things, they're protectors. We're supposed to protect our men. We're supposed to protect our husbands and guard after them as well. And I love that in the game of chess kind of highlights that, because even in a game of chess, the queen fights for her king. So I feel like this kind of represents that protectiveness of fighting for your king, fighting for him, protecting him, guarding him. And moving on from that, in verse 25, they were not ashamed. So I asked God, how was it? What does this mean that they weren't ashamed? And how did that change? I started asking questions like that. And what I really felt like God showed me in them not being ashamed was that in the beginning, I believe they had tunnel vision. In the beginning, I believe they only made eye contact. They didn't look around. They didn't look down at each other's body. I believe they had that, like when God says, just to keep looking at him like we're looking at the horizon. And when we're looking at the horizon and you're staring straight ahead, everything around you starts to blur out. So he showed me this overlapping layer of understanding with that when we have our eyes focused on him, everything else is kind of blurry. But in this time when they had not seen, I don't believe they looked down. I believe that at that time they were not ashamed because they only made eye contact. It was a different kind of intimacy because the other desires of those things hadn't been brought into the picture yet. So then moving into chapter 3, and we look at where now Eve is alone. She doesn't have her covering, which was another thing that God highlighted, that when women are alone, they are more susceptible to being deceived by the enemy, because she wasn't with her husband. She wasn't with her covering. And as soon as she wasn't with her covering, she listened to the wrong voice. And there were so many things that were getting pointed out to me while I was reading this that was just so mind-blowingly fascinating to me. Now, I want to touch a little on the animals and Eve talking to the animals. So with Eve talking to the animals, I've heard so many people are, it's that I think about, because I'm like, I don't think it was so much of like the animals were sitting there just talking and chitter-chattering like we can talk to each other. I think it was very different. And what God showed me this year of spending time being around a ton of cats. We have stray cats that come hang out. We have neighbor cats that'll come over and eat and then they leave. And then we have our own house cats. And there were times this summer that I'd be sitting out in the backyard and I'd look around and there were just cats all over the place. And I'd look around and I'm like, man, it is so peaceful, so amazing. And it's like a cat sanctuary. But I really paid attention to their behaviors this year and really paid attention to how they interacted with each other. And through that, I learned, it was almost like learning their language. I learned how to communicate with the cats and the way that they communicated with each other. And it bonded us. And so there were times that, like, I swear I know what the cats are saying. I know what they need. I know what they want. And there's other times in my life where I swear I know what the animal is telling me, I know what they want, but they're not speaking to me. And I believe that this is kind of somewhat what was happening, because again, we're in this realm of purity, this realm of if I'm imagining, like, if I was in a scenario where I was from day one only around animals, Just like animals, when they're only around each other, they learn to communicate with each other in their own way. Well, if we were surrounded by nothing but animals and never had a language, never had anything but sounds coming out of our mouth, we're all learning how to communicate with each other on that way. So it's not quite as complicated, I think, as sometimes people like to make it. I think that this is really, I really truly believe that this was as simple as just understanding each other. It was a different kind of communication. It wasn't like they were sitting there talking English or whatever the language was. There wasn't a language yet. It was. So let me know what your viewpoints are on that. So now check this out. But in verse 5, the serpent tells her to be as gods. So they were already gods, right? And so this first part right here started this like trickle effect of the end of it, just gave me this mind-blowing revelation, because we're in the month of Epiphany, right? I got a mind-blowing Epiphany revelation. Oh my gosh. So super exciting, but follow me here, okay? So this is just one point to like keep in mind for this, okay? So now moving on, verse 6, her desire was to be wise. And the first sin began with a desire. A desire. She desired something. And what did she desire? She desired to be wise. Now, God tells us that we can ask for wisdom and He'll give it to us. Like, just generously. He'll give it to us. He'll give us as much wisdom as we want. Her desire wasn't a bad desire. Her desire wasn't wrong necessarily. But that's where we can say sometimes, well, God knows my heart. Oh, that wasn't my intention. But you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I understand that statement now more than ever, because her desire was not bad. She had a good intention. Her desire was wisdom. She desired wisdom. But that desire led to a deception, because she was alone. She didn't have her proper covering. And this is a lesson for us women, that when our husband isn't around, when we don't have our covering, we need to be consciously aware that God is our covering. And that word that Adam had, that word originally came from God. She wasn't just disobedient to her husband, she was disobedient to God, because it was the word of God. So it's that act of, I just heard integrity. It's like that, well, what are you doing in the absence of your husband? What are you doing in the absence of your spouse? When that person isn't around, how are you behaving? And this is where prophetic flow comes, because I didn't plan on even talking about that. It's not in my notes. But think about that, though. You know, I mean, that if the woman's covering outside of the presence of her husband is not God, she is susceptible to deception. And we can go so much deeper in that, but I'm not going to go too far into that right now. But there's a lot I can tell you about that and the journey that God has taken me on to understand those things in so much of a deeper way. Now, here's where we go back to, you remember earlier I had talked about where it felt like their eyes, like they had tunnel vision for each other, right? They had tunnel vision. They only looked into each other's eyes. They really didn't see anything else around, like looking at the horizon, right? So then in verse 7 of chapter 3, it says that their eyes were opened. I saw this differently this time. I saw this differently. I saw this as like when you look at a movie and you know how it starts out, sometimes those old movies, it's a little dot and it like opens up and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So as I had earlier, this concept of they had tunnel vision for each other, when he said their eyes opened up, I saw that as like their vision opened. Their peripherals opened. They looked down and they saw each other. And not only did they see each other for the first time, I think they started feeling things for each other that they didn't recognize. Different desires, because obviously desires were there, right? Because she desired wisdom. So they were already feeling these things. They were already feeling desires. But they were the first people, no one to tell them anything. Like, they didn't understand. They didn't know what they were feeling. So I believe that once their eyes were opened, that peripheral was opened, their vision was expanded. They could see more. They saw each other. They no longer were just looking in the eyes. They lost the eye contact and their eyes went down and they saw each other. And they're like, whoa, look at you. And all of a sudden desires started and they didn't understand them. And they're like, ruh-roh, let's cover this up. And they cover themselves up with figs. But we later find out that when we try to cover up our own things, when we try to take matters into our hand, it's not sufficient. And their fig leaves were not sufficient. What was sufficient? Blood had to be shed. Isn't that amazing? For the proper covering, God had to give them a covering, a proper covering that would protect them and keep them warm. Because now they needed a covering, because now they no longer just had eye contact. Now they're leaning down. Now they needed a covering. Now the sin that was created, blood had to be spilled. The sacrifice had to be made in order for them to have a proper covering. Okay, then in verse 11, God comes down. They hear him walking in the garden. God comes down. And God says, Who told thee that you were naked? The word who really stuck out to me this time, where I was like, who indeed? So we've got the serpent, right? So we already know that there's this communication going on with animals. But then earlier, we had seen also the mention of lowercase g gods, that there were already gods on the scene. And now he's saying, who told you? So he knew there's communication going on. He knew there was other things going on. And then in verse 12, the very next verse, the blame game starts. There it is, right there. The blame game starts. Adam says, it's the woman you gave me. And I don't know why my phone is doing that. But all of a sudden, my phone just had fireworks going off. I don't know what happened with that. Okay, so blame game starts in verse 12. Adam says, it's the woman you gave me. The woman says, serpent did it. God. Now I'm kind of a little, is there? I don't know. Maybe there's people on here that I can't tell are on here and doing things. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so in King James Version, when the blame game starts, she says that the serpent beguiled her. So another fun word I looked up means to charm or enchant. What I find interesting is as God starts dealing out the punishments for their disobedience, one of them listed is that she, in verse 16, is that her only desire is going to be for her husband. That really kind of blew me away, that it was like her desire is to only be with her husband is a punishment? Why is that a punishment? And then I thought, was that because she was separated from him because she wasn't with him? Oh my gosh, I feel like that's what it's because New Revelations. That's what he meant by that. The desire for her to be only with her husband was to only be in his presence. I think that's what that means, to only be in his presence, because when she was outside of his presence, she listened to the deceit of the thing. She didn't know how to be alone. So she was like, no, your desire is only going to be for your husband. Your desire is not going to be for wisdom. It's not going to be for trees. It's not going to be to go over here lollygagging in the garden and look at all the pretty things and ooh, does that taste good and can I try that and what's going on over here, because no, little missy, you need to be with your husband. So your desire is going to be with him. So strange. I've never saw it like that before. So I love how God gives us these fresh revelations, these new things. And as we start talking and we just let it flow, that's when it comes out and he shows us new things. But I love that, because the thing that I also learned recently, and I don't know, recently in a year or two or whatever, but was that at the cross, this punishment was broken. At the cross, everything that happened before was also solidified and taken care of, and that was the whole point of him coming. Wasn't just for our sins, but was for the sins of what had happened previously. It was because of those sins that he came in to save us from ourselves. So that punishment for her desire to only be with her husband is broken. I get that now. That's why, like, I enjoy my own time sometimes. I enjoy alone time, and that's okay. It's okay to want your own alone time. It's okay for each of you as husband and wife to have your own time with God, to have your own thing, because that punishment of her desire to be right by his side and have to be right there the whole time. It's almost like I just because of everything that I learn and do, like I heard anxious attachment. It's almost like it created this anxious attachment style where like this whole idea of like, no, I can't be away, I'm supposed to be with him. It's this like faulty mentality that came from that fault, from that punishment that we no longer are bound to anymore. It is a punishment we are no longer bound to anymore. So that is a very wonderful, beautiful new revelation that I'm just gonna put a little note here real quick, because that is a whole new like loving that. Okay, let's see where we are. Where are we? We're almost done here. I promise we're almost done. This is where it gets good. This is like that end, like, what did that just say? That what the heck? Okay, so I'm looking at these things and I'm like, the trees. Why were there trees they couldn't eat from? Why was there a tree that said you would be like the other gods, lowercase g, knowing good and evil if you ate this tree? Why was there a tree of life that if they ate it, they would be living forever? So I started asking, why? What's up with these trees? And then he doesn't destroy them. He moves them, and they're guarded by cherubim. They're guarded by this flaming sword. So they're here. The trees are still here somewhere, right? They're not destroyed. Why? I love asking God why. It's so fun. Here's the crazy thing that I feel like he showed me. The why is because those trees are what the lowercase g gods feed on while they're here. That's why they live. That's why they know good and evil. Because like he said, if you eat this tree, you'll be like them. You'll know that. You'll know those things. Does that mean they need the tree? You know, I'm like, okay, so follow me here, but I'm like thinking of this in like a sci-fi kind of a way. When I'm thinking about like when these other movies like Prometheus or something, maybe, I don't know, that's the one I should reference, but it's the one that just came to my mind. But I totally just saw that one, like the beginning scene of like he's standing by the river and he just like when you see these other things go to other places, they need either the water kills them or something, like they can't survive the air, or like we go to other planets and we need the spacesuit on because we can't survive the air. So I was like, oh my gosh, are these trees here for them to feed on? They know where it is. God knows where it is. There's angels that are guarding it. The supernatural realm knows where these trees are. Do they feed on it? Is it their food so that they could be here? Because those other gods, the lowercase g gods, were already here. And when Eve was talking to the serpent, and when the serpent said, you'll be like them, she didn't say who. She didn't say what gods. What do you mean? That she already had an understanding of. That she already knew. She didn't ask, what do you mean? Be like gods. No, she understood you'd get wisdom. She understood you'd know good and evil like they did. She understood there was a difference between her and them. You get that? So, that's what I got for today. That was my Bible study. That was everything that I felt like kind of pulled out to me. What did you guys learn today? Is there anything that you got out of that? Did anything that I say spark anything that is making you say, what? You know? How do you feel about those things? Do you have any thoughts to add to that? How can we apply this to our life every day? Because let me tell you, one of the things that really calls out to me is this from the woman's point of view, okay? Because I'm going to speak from that woman's point of view, from Eve's point of view. Fawn Eve. right? So, the desire to be with the husband, it's not punishment to want to be in the presence of your husband. And it's okay to have your own time sometimes. And what was the other part of that I wanted to say is, like God tells us to stay focused on him, and that as we seek him and we look at him, and like it's like looking at the horizon. You just stare at Jesus. It's like Peter getting out of the boat. As long as he was looking at Jesus, he was walking on water. The second he looked away, he started to sink into the water. So that's how that we look at Jesus and that horizon, and we don't see everything else that's going on because we only are looking into the eyes. It's a different kind of intimacy. And so that's the intimacy that I want to challenge any wives out there to do to their husbands, and husbands for your wives, to maintain eye contact. Our eyes are open, and yeah, we can see all around us. But what are we choosing to see? What are we choosing to focus on? Are we focusing on the things that make us feel ashamed? Are we focusing on the beautiful things? What are we focusing on? He opened our eyes, and we can see, but what are we choosing to look at? I think that's the question for the day. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you watch it back on the playback and get to see all the fun stuff that God showed me today. And I'm so excited for this journey. Thank you so much for being here. May God bless you.